Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I hope you are having a great day so far, and welcome to a video that frankly I did not think was going to happen. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, today I'm going to be reviewing and sharing my thoughts on, if I can open it, the new palette from Wayne Goss. Now, I initially was so excited to pick this up. It was going to be my first Wayne Goss purchase. I haven't purchased from the brand before. Nothing has ever kind of leapt out and grabbed me by the gizzards and forced me against my will to purchase it. But this was really a unique colour story for me that I hadn't really seen before. I was excited to try. I felt like it was my shades and it was gonna, work for my eye colour, and it was just gonna be something different that I didn't already have in my collection. But very quickly things took a bit of a dark turn with regards to this palette and the comments I was seeing and people's reaction to some of the reviews, and it just got all a little bit ugly. People were very conflicted about this palette. There were some very differing opinions on how good it was or was not. There was a terrible review from Temptalia, and a lot of people, including myself, really trust Temptalia and have done for many years. And so the rating that this was given was a real shock for a lot of people, and it really created this whole mood of like mistrust and judgment of people who actually liked this palette. So it really put me off wanting to review it, to be honest, because I really do not want to contribute or add further to this negativity. I just try to keep it positive here. I don't want to, stir that all back up again. But at the same time, I do listen to you guys, and you guys have been saying, please, we want to know what you think. And I don't want to let you down. I don't want you to spend your money if it's not something that is worth it. And I do want to try and help you. So I'm just going to put my big girl pants on today a little bit and do my best for you. So this arrived this morning and I have been playing with it ever since. I want to make sure that I am as transparent in this video and as helpful as I possibly can be. So I'm going to show you some live swatches now, and I am also showing you while I'm doing these swatches just how much I'm rubbing my finger in the pan so that you can see there's no smoke and mirrors here. This is a very normal swatch for me, a normal number of swirls per pan and a normal one swipe swatch. I didn't try to doctor these. I didn't try to make them look better, and actually they swatched better than I was expecting based on other swatches I've seen and other people's experiences. They swatched pretty decent. I didn't prime my arm or anything. That's a bare, naked, normal human arm, and at this point I wasn't concerned. I thought, oh, actually pleasantly surprised, they swatched okay. You can't really see the peachy highlight shade so much there, but I was kind of expecting that based on other reviews I've seen, that it is like not the most pigmented, vibrant and colourful shade. It really is quite a sheer, luminous, glowy shade. So as far as the swatches go, I wasn't concerned. So far so good. The packaging I really like. As I said, this is my first purchase from Wayne Goss. I was kind of impressed by the packaging. It's not so heavy as I maybe thought it might be, but it is a nice quality plastic. The mirror's a nice quality. I like the silver in between the pans, and the pan size for me isn't an issue. Obviously I knew these were the size of their pans when I picked it up, but a lot of people I have seen would prefer a smaller pan size for a smaller price. Wouldn't we all? And a lot of people have an issue with this black, which I know that Wayne has said every one of his palettes will feature this black shade because he feels like it's a necessary element to any eyeshadow palette. I know a lot of people feel like they don't want it in there, especially if you plan to buy every one of Wayne's palettes, you're going to have that same shade repeated and repeated. For me, in this palette, I feel like it works. It's actually quite necessary in order to deepen and smoke up the look and it to mesh really well with these shades. But I do understand that actually if he was to make a peachy palette, for example, or a pink palette, if you've already ever purchased one of his palettes, you aren't going to need a black, and it's not really going to fit or work in that palette. So I do understand that that becomes a con if you're buying every one of his shades, or his palettes, sorry, and you no longer want it or need it as you already have one. So let's get on to the tutorials, and I'm going to edit these as little as possible because I've seen again some comments of people thinking that there's funny business going on with editing, and I really don't think that's the case. I think a lot of the time, you know, we will edit out unnecessary footage because otherwise, you know, sometimes I can take half an hour to blend my eyeshadow, and if I don't edit it slightly, that's a very boring video for everybody concerned. So I will try to edit this as little as possible, but I am showing you the full process. Now on this first eye, I didn't really have many issues. I was actually getting quite excited on this eye because I was thinking, oh, do you know what? It's fine. I do agree that the two grey mattes are very similar. And so I do wish that the deeper grey matte was a bit richer or maybe had a bit more blue to it to make them more different to each other. I did actually build up some depth with the deeper one. I definitely felt like that was building up and adding some richness and some depth. But I do understand that in a 6-pan palette, it does feel a little bit of a waste. At this stage, I really didn't have any issues other than fallout. There was definitely some noticeable fallout from the matte shades, which isn't something I'm usually used to experiencing with, say, Natasha Denona, Pat McGrath. You might get some fallout with some of their really crazy shimmer shades if you're not kind of careful, but matte shades not so much. So that is something that I do agree with Temptalia's review. There was definitely some noticeable fallout from the mattes. On this eye, as far as the mattes blending, they blended pretty nicely. Not the most soft, creamy mattes that blend themselves that I've ever used, but certainly not problematic at this stage. The black was super nice and easy to work with. Blacks can be tricky for me. I have a heavy hand. I'm not a makeup artist. So I went very lightly and it did exactly what I wanted to do, just adding some depth and richness to the eye. No issues with the black. And then I went in with the gorgeous, stunning teal shade, the showstopper from the palette. Now I went in initially with my MAC 242, and I know he advises you use a finger, but I always use a MAC 242 for shimmers, so I did want to stick to that just to show you how it works with a brush in case you're someone who doesn't want to use a finger, and for fairness if you're comparing to other palettes I've demoed before. But as you can see, a decent application with a brush, not a huge crazy amount of fallout, but the finger definitely did add an extra level of opacity. Now the peachy shade in here I used on my brow bone and in my inner corner, and really it did exactly what I wanted to do. It kind of brightened that area, it gave me some highlight there, and that's kind of exactly what I feel like this shade is for. So I wasn't as disappointed with that shade as I think a lot of people have been. If you're expecting it to be a really punchy lid shade, then I think you'll be disappointed. But if, like me, you're kind of expecting it to be a brow arch, inner corner highlight shade, which otherwise this palette doesn't have anything that does that, then I think you'll be happy with it. So moving over to the other side, and this is where I started to have some issues, and I think the reason why is that my left eye it always causes me some trickier issues. It's definitely maybe got some like dryness there. It's just definitely a little more problematic than my right eye, and this is where the palette started to get a bit exposed. So I think essentially what's going on here is if you've got texture, dry patches, or particularly oily lids, this palette isn't going to deal very well with any of those issues. I think that is what is going on with this palette. So it's going to give you a different experience depending on what your eyelid skin is like and composed of, and the texture. So I think any issues, any dry patches, any texture and things like that, I think some of these mattes will and are going to have issues blending out, and I certainly had some with these mattes on that side. There was definitely some patchiness, definitely some issues blending and getting some coverage there. You can definitely still see like my skin showing through, and it definitely didn't really want to blend up towards my eyebrow. I then went in with the satin in the palette, and again this was a little underwhelming slash disappointing for me, because it just, you really can barely see a difference between it and the matte, which is a problem because it then just kind of looks like you've put the one shade all over your whole lid, which is, you know, fine, that is a look some days. But yeah, I would have liked again to see a bigger difference between that satin and the mattes, because I just think you can't really see a textural difference between them. On this side, I didn't seem to have as much issue with fallout because I used less shades, so therefore there's less fallout, but there definitely was a little bit. Again, I used the same peachy shade as the brow bone and inner corner. Again, no issues with that. And now you can see me using that peachy shade as a highlight, which I got this idea from Morgan, my friend Morgan Turner. She used the shade as a highlight, and I think it's a gorgeous highlight, and it certainly gives you a bit more use out of the palette. And if that's a shade that you were wishing was going to be usable on your lid and now you think, oh, it doesn't really have enough pigment, then you can certainly use this as a beautiful highlight for the face and brow bone and inner corner, and I think that makes it actually not a sort of redundant shade in the palette that I think for some people it has been. So whacked on some lashes, and here are the finished looks. I'm trying to point out areas where the eyeshadow hasn't blended that well and where it has some issues, as well as the quite significant fallout at this point on my right eye. I think over time while I was doing my second eye, there's definitely been some more fallout happening onto the cheek, and I have brushed that away, but the glitter from the Celestial shade has definitely kind of stuck to my cheek. So this is definitely a palette that I would suggest you do eyes first, and then you can wipe away with a baby wipe, which might be more helpful. Okay, so here's my final thoughts. Do I think this is an absolute dud and a disaster? No. Do I think it has some issues and some challenges, and do I think it's a little bit problematic? Yes. So therefore, would I recommend it? Not really, no. I think for me personally, I love this colour story. I have no issues with this shade. I know lots of people were a bit disappointed with this one, but for me, I always saw this as being a brow bone inner corner highlight, and I think it does that really, really nicely, and I love it as a highlight. So for me, I'm cool with that shade. I do agree with lots of people that these two mattes, the grey mattes, are too similar. They don't look as similar in the pan, but when you blend them out on the eye, I don't think you get as much blue showing through as it looks like in the pan, and it's not as rich as you might like. So I do feel like these are too close together. I would have loved this one to have been richer and maybe a bit bluer. The other issue I've got is these two, or these three, then all do look quite similar when on the eye. As you can see from this, you wouldn't necessarily think I had a shimmer on the eye. I think it looks like I've just done one of the mattes all over the whole eye. So again, I don't have an issue with it being a satin, but I wish it had been a different shade, maybe much lighter or something like that, so it actually gives you a different option. And you can see, you know, light and shade, and you can see glow and matte, but at the moment I think it's just too close in texture and in shade to these two to kind of give you anything that's a bit more of a cohesive look. I think the black performed really, really well, and I have no issue with it being in here because, as I said, it works really nicely with the colour story. This shade is beautiful. I wish it didn't have as much fallout, and I wish it had as much opacity with a brush as it does with a finger, but that's the case for lots of shades. So those are kind of my thoughts on each individual shade. As far as the overall of the palette, I primed my eyes with concealer and set with powder, so that's something that I would suggest. I don't think this is going to be one that's going to go nicely over an eyeshadow primer, or not as nicely, because I think it does need powder to blend into to give it the best chance to not catch. I think if you've got like dry or oily eyelids, any kind of problematic eyelids or sensitivities, things like that, it's probably going to exaggerate those issues, so I wouldn't suggest it for you. If you love this colour story and this look is really like the only look that you want to purchase it for, I think you'll be happy with it. I think you can just certainly get a nice look. I'm really happy with this eye. I didn't have many issues really, the only issue being fallout, and generally I do my eyes first, so it wouldn't cause me as much of an issue with that. If I had done my eyes first today, I could have wiped with a baby wipe and we wouldn't have had a huge issue. I think it is expensive, especially if you're here in the UK and you have to pay 20% extra in taxes to get it here, and I had to pay $15 to try and get it here quickly, even though it still took a week to arrive. So it is expensive, and I think you could probably do better for your money with a bit more diversity and a bit more like opacity to the shadows. If you want to buy this palette just for this shade, I'm going to show you a couple of palettes that I would suggest over this one. So somebody asked me about the Interstellar Icons from Pat McGrath. Now the blues or the teal is not similar in here. I will show you this one in here. It has a blue purple shift. It's definitely more creamy and more opaque than the Wayne Goss shade. So this, let me swatch the Wayne shade again. So this is the Wayne Goss shade here, and this is the Interstellar Icons. Now, they do have a similar level of like sheen to them, but the Pat McGrath definitely performs better with a brush and is giving me much less fallout. It is slightly more purple. It isn't the exact same shade, but just for comparison's sake, to show you. Another palette that I would suggest or recommend thinking about considering, especially as it's like 30% off right now, if you just love this color story, but you're looking for something that's going to offer you a bit more versatility and that's going to perform slightly better without the issues that this one has, I would suggest Mothership I from Pat McGrath, because if you're just looking for that gorgeous green, but you want some shades that are going to work better as far as the mattes and the crease shades and things like that, this is going to be a much better choice. The blue in here is obviously much darker, but if I just show you, so the blue, much darker, as you can see, but there's topper shades in here, and if you place this white looking topper shade on top of the blue, so you end up with a darker, richer version of the shade in the Wayne Goss palette. So if you're really looking for like a lot of impact and a real, you know, statement blue, then I would certainly suggest either going for the Pat McGrath Interstellar Icons, although that palette doesn't have any mattes, or if you want a cohesive full palette that does it all but contains some beautiful blue shades to play with, the Mothership one, and it's 30% off at the moment, so it's the best time to buy, I guess. So my final thoughts on this palette: is it the best palette I've ever used? No. Is it extremely awful, terrible? I'm going to put it in the bin when I finish this review? No. I kind of sit somewhere in between those two extremes. I think it's a beautiful color story and palette and idea that hasn't just quite come off in the way that I personally would have loved it to. I am exactly perfect with this color story. I don't have an issue with this being in here or the black. Lots of people do, and I get it. I get why. But for me personally, my first Wayne Goss palette, I like both of those shades. Those are probably my two favourites in the palette, in fact. I like the blue, it's lovely. I wish it did have less fallout, but otherwise it wouldn't have been an issue. The issue for me lies with these three shades, and they look beautiful here. I think if this one had a lot more shimmer and glow to it, and these two performed more how they look in the pan, as in they look, you know, like this is just a lighter grey and this is a rich blue grey. I feel like if they translated onto the lid, I would have been happy with that. And if they were just a little creamier and easier to blend with a bit less fallout, we'd have been there and we'd have all been, you know, swinging from the rafters with joy. But yeah, sadly it was just like a slight close but no cigar for me. I wouldn't recommend it because there are some issues, and actually if you have different eyelids, prime differently, use different brushes, you may have even more problems than I had. So for that reason, I don't think I can recommend it to you in good conscience. But at the same time, if you have already forked out and purchased this, like I have, I don't think you'll be absolutely devastated when it arrives, because I think you can get the look like I was wanting to, that I did on this eye, and you just have to maybe learn to work with it. And certainly I would recommend doing your eyes first. So I really hope this review was helpful to you in some way, and I would love to see you in the next one. Otherwise, take care for now. Bye.